Hello, and welcome to another episode of Occult Podcast, the podcast where we do, or at least talk about inadvisable things in the name of magical science. As always, I am Tyler Cadmian, aka Shadow, and joining me, as always...
Felix, S is for subject, Warren.
Yes! So, had a little bit of a break after episode 10. That was quite the doozy.
Yeah, and what with the holidays being there as well, we just needed our recovery weekend.
Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about holidays and how those work? Because, we have a lot of friends, but they don't have bodies to occupy on, holidays like Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we channel spirits who don't have somewhere to celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas or anything like that. In fact, these Earth holidays are not ones that they regularly celebrate. So we just channel them during holidays.
Yeah. So basically, 2 major channeling sessions within the week kind of wiped you out.
Yeah, I had 2 or 3 people in besides me on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And so did you.
Yeah.
So it was a lot. 2 or 3 different people had Thanksgiving dinner basically.
Yeah.
And I think at some point we'll talk about the particulars of all of that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I haven't really had great experiences with family Thanksgivings. So it was really nice to just go be somewhere else and let someone else be here, and it was novel for them and fun and everything.
Right. Yeah, several people volunteered to do different dishes for Thanksgiving. It sort of felt like a Friendsgiving type of thing, except instead of them cooking in their own place and bringing it over, they would come over and just cook it.
Wouldn't it be great if you had all the ingredients for food and you just left your house and you came back and all of it was cooked?
Yeah.
It's like that without even having to leave the house.
So, but I wanted to provide a little bit of context as to why we didn't have an episode last week. But some stuff that got brought up in that episode, especially Zero and hypnosis, is something that we've been wanting to follow up on. So that's what this episode is about.
It's in a very specific area of hypnosis. It is being the subject of hypnosis.
The subject is the subject. Felix and I have been, researching it comes up as an area in parapsychology.
It's everywhere.
Anytime you look up anything like this, psychic or hypnosis, did someone magically hypnotize everyone to believe that they were floating things around rather than actual floating things around? Those are sort of trite examples, but
for a real hard science one, if you're studying any kind of neuroscience from the 40s to the 60s, a lot of times whenever they're testing out how brain scans work, they would test out what the brain scans would look like when someone was under hypnosis.
Yeah.
They would just see that hypnosis changed somebody's alpha brain waves.
And so hypnosis and psychic work are very intertwined. Mantis and Jules actually mentioned a hypnosis thing called Zero.
Yeah.
So
and Mantis is as far as I can remember, Mantis started Zero and made sure everybody knew it.
Yeah.
And so it's funny now, we've decided to have this be subject first, hypnotist second.
Right.
And so for a couple of episodes now, Mantis's hypnotic subjects are talking about his techniques.
Yes.
Not him.
Yes.
And I think that might be the best way for you to learn about it.
Yeah.
Is learn what it is like, I'll just say on the receiving end. So 0 is basically your life preserver up back to the surface. Or if you were floating, your weight down to the surface.
Yeah.
You need somewhere that is center, that is default, that is, you're not in a trance now. This is just you doing your stuff. That's what 0 is.
Yeah. And it's been a very fascinating thing to talk about and use. Because, like, it's a very versatile thing because, yes, it's coming from a hypnosis background. Mantis is very well versed in a lot of different hypnotic sub-genres. I don't really know how to say it. Like, he's well versed in
different types of hypnotism.
Yeah.
Different schools.
Yes, schools of hypnotism. But, like, 0 as a concept works with any sort of trance.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that gets talked about when talking about learning 0 is this is what it feels like to be under trance, not to be hypnotized. Hypnotism is something that can bring you into trance. It can also do other things. It's specifically like, are you in a trance? Well, even if you're not sure,
you can say
go for 0 and see if it's different.
Yeah. I mean, there's times where, like, I'm acting out of it or something, and Felix or someone else will recommend that I 0, 0 as a verb, just say 0, and nothing changes, and I'm like, yeah, it's because I'm sick.
Yeah, sometimes I'll 0, and it's like, nothing's different, this is anxiety.
Yeah.
It's not a trance, it's mental illness.
And it's really nice to use that as sort of a good reference point for your own brain. And, like, 0, what 0 is, it doesn't mean that you're in, like, a very calm, happy state. It just means that your brain is not, like, tranced or disassociated. Or it can be disassociated because that's, like, a mental state, not, like, a state imposed upon your brain, if that makes sense.
I've been, like, I myself, while talking to some spirits and sometimes you and some other, like, other people as well, have basically, been, like, discussing the fact that 0 is not the only thing. It is not the catch-all that means that you're completely out of trance.
Right.
It means that your state of mind is in the state of mind where you do not feel like you're in trance.
Right.
That is what 0ing is that it's getting you to where to the mental state you're familiar with that says you're not in a trance.
Right.
And being aware of that is very important because your mind changes over time. 0 is going to move as, like, time goes on.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think that what it does is it helps engage the part of the brain that pays attention to that.
Yeah.
Like, it engages your middle prefrontal cortex, and, like, that in itself is extremely valuable because if you're, like, tunneling somewhere into a very specific part of your brain, then it can be really hard to kind of have a bird's eye view of things, to have, like, a default logic view of things.
Yeah.
Or even just to, like, consider it's like, I'm really focused on this subject, but not noticing that it's making you feel really bad.
Yeah.
So getting back to center where you're able to think about thinking, it puts you in this state where you can consider yourself again.
Yeah. And, like, there's many different methods to use, but 0's been a very interesting shortcut, and, like, this has been a longer running experiment. I think it's been over 2 years now since we've been using it. It's been at least 1.5 years.
I remember us being in the house when 0 was first a thing. So it's been, like, it's been over 2 years.
It's been 2 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we're casually talking about this, but we're literally, like, talking about an entity that is being channeled, hypnotizing us.
And I will mention, I am reading a book on solid science being done on ESP and psychic stuff in the 60s and 70s, and also a little earlier. And the scientists are openly discussing the implications and the use of telepathic hypnotism.
Yeah.
Talking about they've found telepaths, and they had telepaths try to hypnotize people with their telepathy using only thoughts, and they were starting to discover results.
Yes.
So there's real data on telepathic hypnotism.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about hypnotism, and we've also talked a lot about Mantis, but Mantis is not going to be our guest.
That's right. You're going to meet a new person.
You're going to meet a new person. And part of the reason we're going to meet a new person is because it's new in a lot of ways. Like, Felix is going to be channeling them, so they and I will be getting into it in a bit, but I don't want to provide any spoilers because I really want them to share the story.
Yeah. Why this person is the subject of the subject of the subject.
You will find out very shortly, but they need to explain it themselves.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna hand off the torch.
Cool. Thank you so much, Felix. As always. So, yeah, this is someone that is actually rather newer to us in general. It's actually very exciting. It's someone that we've talked about it previously. Like, we have interacted with some of these entities, but not actually known their names or like backstories or anything until more recently. But this is definitely someone that Felix has had a relationship with for a long time, and very excited to have him on the podcast for the first time. They are getting grounded and getting centered into the body. Hey, welcome. So your picture is up. Unfortunately, we're in a different room, so you can't really see it big, but you will see it at some point.
Yeah, I helped telegraph it, as it were, so I do know a little bit of what it looks like. I'll see it later.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome. Always ask any of our new guests a series of questions. The first one is, what do we call ya?
You can call me Venom.
Venom. I mean, you've got that nice... Is that what kind of hat is that?
That's a cowboy hat.
Hat.
It's...
Cowboy shades.
Felix wasn't particular, but it would be a Stetson or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like a little bit older. Like it's kind of, the brim is a little bit wavy, so I'm guessing it's an older hat.
Once you have a hat that works, you never retire that hat until it retires itself.
Definitely. Now, gender identity.
I'm a guy.
You're a guy.
He, his.
He, his. Got it. And then, where are you calling in from?
I'm on the ship that every good person is on.
Yes. So another ship, shipmate crew. You're a member of the crew by now.
Yeah, I'm definitely crew. I would not conscience with just being a guest on there. I do jobs.
So, what do you do?
Well, I do security, not just spotting around, but making sure that things can't even get close.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of psychic sighting, distance seeing. In terms of what I do, kind of in general abilities, I do a lot of time travel.
Ooh, time traveler. So, I think that leads very nicely into the story that is part of the reason why you're here. So, you are a newer member of the ship.
Yeah, so, I kind of hopped from an alternate reality is the best way of saying it.
Yeah.
People's common understanding of time and time travel on Earth, I would call it an alternate reality. And I just showed up in an airlock in whatever I was wearing and with whatever I was holding.
Yep. And that caused a few problems because the ship is currently outside the solar system and you just appeared in an airlock.
Out of nowhere.
Nowhere.
There were they were given a heads up that I was going to show up soon. They didn't know how, they didn't know where, but I was going to show up soon. And it was clearly telegraphed what I would look like and what I would have with me.
So you keep mentioning what you would have with you.
Yeah, I forgot it for a while. Funny that. So, let's just say that Mantis tries to meet everybody who comes onto the ship before they get to really come onto the ship.
Right.
In fact, that we don't even have to let's just say that. It's true. Mantis makes sure to be the first person to meet every new person who comes onto the ship, and everybody seems to go along with that just fine.
Seems to.
Yeah, seems to.
Seems to.
Seems
My
that way.
voice cracked a little bit. So, yeah, the whole reason we're having you on is because your story of your first interaction with Mantis is basically you being covert hypnotized to hand over.
Well, so the way it went was I was there. He walks in from the other side of the airlock, and I'm like, oh, wow, who's this guy? And then I'm just kind of agreeing to the general rules of the ship to be able to come on board, which sounds like a great idea. And I don't really remember anything that happened kind of in between seeing his face and agreeing to the rules of the ship. And the rules of the ship are just the rules of the ship. There's nothing specific about the rules of the ship, just the rules of the ship.
And so,
that's the, if I were to very casually think about it, that's the memories that would be produced.
What kind of rules were you potentially in violation of at the time?
Well, it's funny because you would think that he wouldn't go out of his way to say no weapons, no projectile weapons, no projectiles of weapons, no firing devices, no launchers, no, it just kind of seems like that's not something that you would tell to everybody who got on as a generic thing. And it kind of implied that whenever I appeared on the ship, I might have had a gun.
Yeah.
It implied that, which eventually led me to realize that it was true. He managed to use hypnotism to straight up make me forget that I managed to I was holding my gun whenever I ended up over there, so I brought it on with me, because why would I not have it?
Right. So you completely forgot that you had a gun.
I completely forgot that I had a gun, and this is a very important gun to me. And it is very important that I have this gun, I'm not going to say at all times, but during most times.
So then Mantis, in a very certain capacity, were telling you the rules of the ship. What did he call himself?
Oh, you want to get into very specifics?
Yes, we're going to get into very specifics. We want the whole story, and it's very interesting that, I'm having to basically lead you along to talk about this story.
He called himself the safety officer.
He called Mantis the safety officer, was giving you the rundown of the rules of the ship, which strangely included the fact that no firearms were allowed. Though why would he be telling you that? Because you didn't have a firearm.
Right.
Except you did.
Yeah, I did.
And this is why we have Venom on the show, is because his first encounter with Mantis was being an unwitting subject.
I basically got dropped right after I saw his eyes.
Yeah.
Now, when you're dealing with a psychic, you're not just dealing with a hypnotist.
Yes.
I think that all hypnosis does have a psychic component to it, but a lot of hypnotists probably don't consciously consider themselves to be psychic. They're using something subconsciously or whatever.
Right.
But Mantis uses hypnosis psychically. So he doesn't just use eye mesmerism on someone to drop them. He also uses all of the powers of his mind to do it at the same time. And those powers are very easily accessible when you're looking someone in the eye.
Right.
It's very connected to the mental stuff.
Yes.
And I'm going to do something right now. 0.
There we go. There we go.
Because if you remember looking at something like that, it's very easy to get back in the same trance.
The memory of the trance can bring on the trance.
It is a hypnotic memory.
Yes.
Memory implantation is a part of hypnosis, memory control. It's essentially where you're putting the programming in.
Yeah. And so, obviously, we're talking about the fact that you had a gun at the time, and Mantis was able to convince you that you didn't, and took it away. But that
right, it was in that order. I feel so sad hearing it and remembering it. Because I can now see him kind of picking it up, like, suspending it from his fingers like it was a bag of doggy doo-doo or something. Like, just by the butt of the gun. Well, so the thing is, like, if he's obviously not handled a gun a lot.
Yes.
Because if he had, he would have grabbed it different, and it would have been safer for him to do that. But, yeah, he disdainfully plucked it away to wherever it was hidden until we negotiated things later.
Right. Now, between then and the negotiation, there had to be a time that you remembered that you had a gun.
Yes. In fact, it wasn't just that I remembered it. I was talking with a friend, and that friend basically was like, wait, if he told you that you couldn't have a projectile weapon,
that meant
you showed up with your gun! Your gun's somewhere! He's got your gun!
So this person you were talking to was another crew member on the ship?
Yes.
Yeah. That's someone that the viewers haven't met yet, but hopefully we'll have them on in a future episode. But yes, a fellow crew member helped because Mantis always makes sure whenever he's doing hypnosis or anything like this to do it alone.
Everyone on the ship has been hypnotized by Mantis. I'm making this clear. Everyone on the ship has been hypnotized separately by Mantis, and sometimes together. And it's something we all know. We all consciously know sometimes. At this point, everyone's pretty knowledgeable about all of some of the hypnotism that is going on the ship.
Yeah, that's like a big factor, is that Mantis is not just a very strong psychic. He's also a very knowledgeable hypnotist. And one of the issues is that when you're dealing with these kind of like covert, like once you start getting into the field of like parapsychology and things like that, you start realizing how many types of hypnosis can be done without the subject's knowledge.
Yeah, covertly.
Or memory.
That's the thing, is that someone can know they're being hypnotized and then during the hypnosis be told to forget about that.
Right.
So covert hypnosis can be done in a multitude of ways. Like, he just straight on did hypnosis, and then the covert part was that I didn't remember it happened afterward.
Right. So, but the thing is that any kind of like covert hypnosis and any kind of hypnosis that is done with a forget command, you can't 100% guarantee that that's going to last forever. Like, I mean, obviously in Venom's case, he remembered about his gun.
Yeah, and now the way that I can think about the actual process of being hypnotized and the process of forgetting about it is a bit circuitous because of the install. Like,
right.
when something gets put in via hypnosis, you can't just uninstall it and take it away.
Right.
The mechanisms have been put in place in a kind of usually very linear time fashion. And so there's certain things you have to do with logic to be able to access that again.
Right. And you run a very real risk of just running yourself through the hypnosis and reinstalling all of the commands.
Yeah, because if you remember the thing in a certain order, then you're going to hear it all again, and then a certain part of your brain that listens to that automatically is going to install it.
Yeah.
And, like, that could be very dangerous. Now, luckily, before I walked onto that ship, I was already a hypnotist. So it's not been too hard to catch up with some of this.
Right.
Now, did I remember that I was a hypnotist until recently?
No.
And you will not hypnotize me.
God. Another really funny thing is that Venom is really good at mimicry.
That is, a lot of hypnotists are very good at mimicry as well. That's something that is good to be aware of, because it's actually a common technique is to mimic the voice of someone that's the person trusts. Maybe even mimic their own voice. And then if it's a voice that someone trusts, they're much more likely to take it in and just accept it.
Right. And I mean, when you combine this with psychic things like telepathy, like if you're able to physically mimic someone's voice, it'd be easy to telepathically mimic someone's voice and make them think that they're thinking their own thoughts. And that's where some of the psychic stuff comes in.
And you can also use speaking and telepathy at the same time.
Right.
To basically use telepathy to sort of salt your words, flavor them in a certain way, or just make someone think that you sound like what you want to sound like. So it's like you could modify your physical voice, or you could telepathically make it seem like you had.
Right. Or make it sound like, so this is a technique that I've actually experienced, and I haven't actually talked about it before, where someone is telepathically projecting their words into your mind, like a half second before they say it. So it makes it sound like you are thinking and they are speaking what you are thinking. Therefore, they are reading your mind.
Oh, interesting. So fake mind reading using a technique that is psychic.
Yes.
Yeah, so
it's a way to imply compliance and agreement with the what the hypnotist is trying to do.
So I believe that this body has had that technique used on it before, but usually whoever's in this body that receives that technique reacts unfavorably. Has, what is it called, an abnormal reaction?
Yes.
And that's because the perceptions in this physical body don't receive telepathy the same way.
Yes.
And so the timing is not what the person
That's
intends.
the thing, is like a lot of like the language center and stuff and like reasoning and logic is in the left prefrontal cortex. And as we've mentioned several times on this podcast, Felix's body has an area of the prefrontal cortex that does not work.
It's not there the same way that it is for other people.
Yeah.
And so what his brain does instead, or what, like, you know, I'm telepathing from a physical brain somewhere else, so I can bring some of my faculties from there to here. But that means that you have to import that instead of using what's here. And a lot of channeled people usually expect to use what's local because they always assume what's local is going to be the same no matter what store you go to. And
that's part of the reason why we've been pretty discerning, especially with like newer entities, because you are, I would say, quote unquote, newer of the gang that we're working with. Though we're finding out that you have been working with Felix unknowingly.
Under an alias,
you know. Neither of you really knew.
Yeah, he and I had a completely different arrangement than what's going on now. He was doing a lot of writing work where people he was talking to telepathically were basically musing characters for him. Right. And that kind of communication and spiritual relationship comes across much differently than direct channeling. Yeah. So, like, he and I, like, knew each other in a completely different way.
Yeah. So, I think it's very interesting, like, to have you as a newer, you know, member of the crew of the gang to speak about stuff like interfacing with Felix's brain, because it is something that any new entity ends up mentioning.
Yeah, so I had a lot of experience here. Before I was brought onto the ship, I was actually invited by Mantis to do some telepathy and kind of spotting work for Felix's brain.
Yeah.
To basically keep an eye on things in Felix's brain and see what was going on and see if there were any adverse entities showing up.
Right.
Basically providing security for inside the brain. And so I was already very familiar with like Felix and Felix's thinking before I ended up part of the crew.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of gave me some familiarity with the whole channeling beat, with the idea that there's going to be other people in here.
Right.
And also the idea that, specifically in Felix, the furniture is all shared, and someone will put things away and lay things out for you if you do the same for others.
Right.
Like, kind of a communal area. If you want it to be nice, you need to also make it nice.
Right.
And that also means, like, before Mantis hypnotized me and confiscated my gun, he trusted me enough to let me stay in Felix's brain.
Yeah.
So, like, part of the reason why I handed him my gun in the first place is because there was already some
you
shared
had that
trust between us.
established relationship and shared trust. And that's another thing with, like, proper hypnosis. I mean, we've been talking about, like, hypnotist and subject are very, like, polarizing terms, especially in the hypnosis community in general, because, like, people only really identify as either the hypnotist or the subject. There's no real, like,
there's no object.
Switch.
There's a subject, but there's no object.
There's no real in between there, or just like, you know, someone who can do both, or just like prefers one but can do both, or is only feeling one way today but may like feel the other way tomorrow.
And the way it's talked about is completely different than the way it actually works.
Yeah.
Because, so, to be hypnotized, you have to be able to self-hypnotize.
Right.
Your only hypnotist is actually yourself, and the hypnotist who's talking to you or otherwise seeming to induce a trance is convincing you to induce your own trance.
Right.
So every subject is a hypnotist.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that the community talks about it, there's hypnotists and there's subjects. And there's usually a stated preference for being a hypnotist or being a subject. There's an implication that if a hypnotist becomes a hypnotic subject, then
they're tainted, or like there's like some kind of negative connotation, like that you can't really claim that you're a hypnotist.
It sounds like
weird.
They're easy.
It's weird.
It's definitely it is like if the BDSM community had no switches whatsoever.
And it's like, if you ever saw, as a dom, if you ever subbed, then everyone would be thinking that you were a secret sub when you tried to dom.
Yeah, actually, there's like a lot of, I would say a lot of machismo.
Mm-hmm.
That you see in the hypnotism community. And I think it's a real shame because it doesn't really acknowledge how hypnotism actually works.
It gives all the credits to the hypnotist.
Yes, it does, and often the subject is doing all of the work, especially if they've been hypnotized in the first place to do something really strenuous.
Yes.
Like if you hypnotize somebody to do all the chores, the hypnotist gets all the credit, but that person did all the chores.
Right.
And, like,
especially in the cases of like where you're supposed to act in a certain way, or you're supposed to forget the fact that you've been hypnotized and it's supposed to seem normal to you. Like your brain as the subject is doing so much work. Like I can say after like an intense like hypnosis session where I am acting as a subject and had to do a lot of things, I need aftercare in the form of like, in some cases, like just a big honking plate of food.
Yeah.
Because that's just a lot of mental. And in some cases, because like most of the time when you're being hypnotized, it's implied or outright stated that you should use all the items at your disposal.
Yes.
Everything at you can use all of yourself. And fortunately or unfortunately, that can also include your psychic abilities or psychic gifts.
Down to time travel.
So, like, yeah, you could be hypnotized to, like, be doing minor perception changes psychically in order to more effectively fulfill the hypnotic command.
Yeah, and it's all of this is being done by your subconscious.
Yeah.
Like you're consciously doing a lot of work to not notice certain things, and then your subconscious is basically doing it all.
Right.
And in some ways it gives your subconscious like the ability to do things it might not normally be able to do, but in a lot of ways it's asking your subconscious to do a lot of things it doesn't often do or shouldn't be doing all of that often.
Right.
The subconscious is able to do these things so that you can survive. It is a survival these are survival skills and tools that are there in case you need them.
Right.
And so constantly engaging them, it's going to cause you to have a different brain.
Yeah. Because at the end of it all, it is all your own mind. So one of the things that you hear a lot about hypnosis is that the more you're hypnotized, the more easily you can be hypnotized. And that's because, like, you're literally building neural networks and neural pathways that make it easier. And your brain is lazy in that, like, you know, if, like, you have a hypnotist that always does a stairway induction and they tell you, you know, go to the top of a staircase. You might already have dropped yourself, you know, if you've done that a ton of times. Your brain's like, okay, let's skip this whole stupid part and let's just go down to 10.
Well, and then speaking... So the thing is, a hypnotist who is psychic could very easily shortcut by not just hypnotizing with their words and gestures and whatever technique that they're using to induce hypnosis, but they could use telepathy to project the feeling of being hypnotized to the subject, which means that the hypnotist, each time they use hypnosis, will have a stronger feeling of being hypnotized in their own brain.
Yes.
The more you do hypnosis, the more you hypnotize others or yourself, the more susceptible you are to being hypnotized because your brain is shaped more like hypnosis each time.
And like Milton Erickson, if you do any research into hypnosis whatsoever, you're gonna run into his name. He's the famous or infamous one that people have talked about, that he hypnotized a girl to feel better about undressing in front of her fiance on their wedding night. The rumors were spread that, you know, he actually had her undress in front of him. That's what everyone knows him as.
Everybody spread a scandal about him for some reason.
But he is basically known as the father of modern hypnotism. And one of the things that he said is that he always puts himself into a trance to better align with any of his subjects. When he's hypnotizing someone, he is also putting himself into a trance.
He puts himself into a hypnotist trance.
Yes.
And so I want to mention he invented neuro-linguistic programming, and neuro-linguistic programming is being used a lot right now by a lot of people on social media. Anybody doing like the grind set sort of stuff, anybody doing any kind of headspace stuff, if there's a Greek letter in front of it, then NLP is being used.
Yeah.
And Milton's usage of NLP was simply that he recognized that whenever people use language and social interactions and anything that is considered automatic, they're already leaving an opening for any kind of trance induction.
Yes.
So hijacking the code that everybody's already automatically taking in and running, instead of inventing new code for them to run on top of that. And so almost the father of modern covert hypnotism, but not by his design. He simply noticed this was happening.
Right. So yeah, like, hypnotists go into a trance as well, and like you hear about this sometimes in certain parts of hypnotists, like circles where someone does like a hypnosis battle or a hypnotist battle to see who's the best. A duel who could be dropped first. And I mean, like, yes, those can be interesting, but anytime that you are engaging with hypnosis, whether as the hypnotist or as the subject, you are going to go into a trance of some kind.
I mean, it's really, really hard to engage with someone who is in a trance and not in some way be affected by them being in a trance. It's hard to be around an entranced person and stay like sober and focused.
Yes.
It is,
and in some cases trying to stay sober and focused yourself brings that person out of a trance. Like, say for example, if I was like, trying to hypnotize Venom, and I notice that I'm in a trance and I say, either under my breath or even like mentally, if I said it loud enough, 0.
Mm-hmm. I would have that
be reminded
reminder that hypnosis exists.
Yeah, and that you could say 0.
And you know what? 0.
There you go.
I've actually done it quietly a few times during the podcast already.
Yeah.
The subject has come up, and I'm constantly clearing myself out. Don't feel bad if you need to do that.
Yeah.
That's your self-care. Frickin' do it.
Like, we're talking about the subject of hypnosis, and like we mentioned, just thinking about this stuff brings up the edges of the trance, or the memory of the trance, and that's enough to re-entrance you.
It's actually... It's interesting. We've had conversations about hypnosis, and we often have to walk around the subject as we're having the conversation.
Yes. And this is probably going to be another one where we are sort of repeating ourselves several times because we are dealing with a topic that lends itself to forgetfulness. Like, one of the first things that you read in most hypnotist manuals is to test this out by making the subject forget something. Like, that is like one, if not the first first exercise, it's in the top 3.
I really don't like that the forgetfulness, like, is included in pretty much every trance or every act. I think it's kind of sloppy that it's so
I
default.
believe that it's because it's a very easy way to prove to yourself and to the subject that this is real. And that's a big part of hypnosis, is the more you believe that you can be hypnotized, the easier you are to be hypnotized.
Yeah, and so even just like the safety and prevention part of it is a little difficult to deal with, because if you have this mindset that hypnotism, that you're extremely susceptible to hypnotism, and so you need to defend yourself against hypnotism, then you've suggested to yourself that you're extremely susceptible to hypnotism.
Right. Yes. It's a very interesting paradox. The more you're aware of hypnosis, the easier it is for you to be dropped.
Yeah, I think, would we say that there is a comparison to the game here?
Yes, there is definitely a comparison to the game. People who are hyper aware of the game are always on the lookout for, things that can imply the game.
They're always looking to declare the game thing,
yes.
Which means they're constantly thinking of the game.
Right. And it's also, I think the game as well is sort of one of those programming things where it's like, it is expected to be a norm, and people accept that as a standard. And I've encountered several people who are like irrationally angry.
Yeah, that you don't just automatically accept it.
I tell them I don't play the game. Like, they will I've had it a few times where I've had someone literally argue with me that I did lose the game, and was like upset that I wasn't upset.
So, we should probably tell the audience what the game is.
Yes, please.
So, the game is a story someone tells you to convince you that you're playing a certain type of game.
Mm-hmm.
And, so do you want to play the game? Once you hear the rules of the game, you have to play the game.
You are playing the game.
You are playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the game is that you can't think about the game. If you think about the game, you lose
lost
the game.
And you have to announce that
and you need to declare out loud that you just lost the game. Now, after this, I think a couple of rules differ depending on who you heard it from.
Yes.
For instance, I've heard that now basically 30 minutes after, nobody gets to declare that they've just lost the game.
Right.
But that just so happens to be the amount of time that the brain keeps a certain type of temporary memory around.
Yeah.
So
I call it the what if memory.
Yeah, the what if memory. So this is actually a psychological test.
Yes.
And I believe that the people who started it, like, in my opinion, I know that this was started at like a psychology place.
Yes.
But in my opinion, the people who started this were trying to get more test subjects for something than they actually were able to do.
Right.
That they basically put a covert induction into a set of rules and also added the social pressure that exists of, like, not saying no to things.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, though, and this is something that I didn't come up with. This is already something that Felix has deeply thought about when it came to the game, and I'm getting it from his brain. Technically, the game is not a game by the definition of games, because to play a game, you have to first agree to the rules and then agree to play the game.
And they're also...
That is the rules of a game. So you cannot, like, the game already violates the rules of games. You are not automatically drafted into playing it.
Right. Right. And it's sort of implied that, like, the first rule being, you know, that you have to play.
Yeah, once you hear the rules of the game,
you have to play.
You have to play. And it's like, that's not how games work.
Yeah.
That's actually... That sounds more like a bet.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's not really in the realm of what... Like... Now I got this definition originally from Felix. It's definitely not in the realm of what he considers games to be.
Yeah.
I don't consider this to be fair game.
No. There's definitely a lot of social pressure not to conform. It's definitely more of like, and like I was saying, I've had someone be very rationally angry when I said I don't play because I wasn't upset that there was a reminder of the game.
The irrationality of their anger meant that either they had already been inducted by it, and therefore they were defending their hypnotic induction, which they had accepted. It was very angering for them to see that you did not accept it. That part of their logic for accepting in the first place was that everyone would accept it.
Yes.
So, here's the thing about games. Russian roulette is not a game. It's a very famous game, but it is not a game. And now, if two people were willingly playing Russian roulette for some reason, sure. But Russian roulette, as it was originally popularized as an actual torture technique, anybody who would be accepting a game of Russian roulette under the original setup of it would be doing so under duress.
Oh boy, we're getting into torture techniques.
Yeah. Hypnotism has been used as a torture technique. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. Can you hypnotize somebody to do something they don't want to do? Yes, you can.
Yep.
You can do anything you want to do if you put your mind to it.
We're going there. I mean, like, you were hypnotized to do something you didn't want to do.
I didn't want to give him my gun.
You didn't want to forget your gun. You forgot... Like, this
I would prefer to forget my gun than to give it to him and know he had it. I think is what it came down to. I think he might have first tried to get... I can't quite cross this river, but I bet that he first tried to hypnotize me, to just give him... Yep, give me the gun, is what he said. And I said, no, sir. I cannot give you this gun. And then he had to make me forget that I had a gun. That's what it took.
Yeah.
And it's because a part of me could not conscience doing that because of what the gun meant to me.
And what it means to you. You have it back.
Well, the thing is, it means something different to me now.
Oh, no.
So I'm just talking from, past point of view. But, we haven't really gotten... I've mentioned already that he and I talked it out, though.
Yes, that you have it now.
Yeah. So, anyway...
But I want to get back to... We've sort of, done a loop-de-loop here, and we're finally back to this. How did you feel when you remembered that you had the gun, and that meant that Mantis hypnotized you to forget you had the gun?
So the interesting thing is, it's really hard to say that, because there were 3 drops after. So if you remember something like this, yourself will try to drop you in self-defense so you don't break the induction. That's how hard it was to remember. As I remembered, and then it was like, oh yeah, well, something else. No, I got this. Mantis hypnotized me to... We've got to make popcorn later out of the other stuff. And...
Yeah.
But Mantis hypnotized me to forget about me. Fucking... We gotta do laundry. You can fight yourself for a long time when it comes to... You're basically trying to figure out subconsciously... Do I keep doing this, or do I put it down? Because, and do I put it down forever, or do I put it down for a little bit, or do I start making up new rules as to how I even, explore or navigate this space? Is where your subconscious is going at that point. Your subconscious is having to make decisions.
Yes, and this is, honestly, my biggest problem with covert hypnosis, and especially any sort of hypnotism that is supposed to deal with memory for, retention.
Yeah.
Or lack thereof. Because you still physically have a recollection of it, and you have to remember to not remember it.
You cannot actually follow the induction unless you remember the induction. You
can't actually follow the commands unless you remember the commands.
The commands are on a little cassette tape, and your brain saved all the cassette tapes. Now, where it put them and how it accesses them probably changes depending upon all sorts of things that happened whenever that memory was made. But, if you think of it as little tapes, and where the hell is that tape? It helps. It's like an Inside Out.
Yes.
When they have the little boxes.
Yes.
Like that.
Another thing that I'd like to bring up as well, that I think is something that is very important to think about when you first get into hypnosis, is something that Mantis calls Rule 0, which is assume you've already been hypnotized.
Yeah. You have to assume you've already been hypnotized. People have, honestly, by listening to music in the womb, been hypnotized.
Yeah.
That would happen. That's what a lullaby is.
Yeah. It's supposed to lull you to sleep.
That's why that works. This hypnotism is built into humanity.
Mm-hmm. This
is a thing that we can do, and it's something that's supposed to protect us.
Yeah. And it's it's a variation on compartmentalization. And that's why I'm always upset about covert hypnosis and any kind of hypnotism that involves forgetting, is because it's basically forcing your brain to compartmentalize, and then every time because say for example, you found a bullet just somewhere in the ship.
Deny, delay, defend?
Oh, God.
Yes!
No, we're not talking about that.
Look, We don't get a lot out there, but when we do get news, oh man.
It's the big stuff. So yeah, that sort of dates when this is. That was very recent.
We heard about that, and oh man, the memes, they're all the way out where we are.
Oh my god. So, yeah. If you encountered, I mean, even like looking at other types of guns on the ship, like that is enough of a memory to like start unraveling things, and your subconscious has to be like, okay, do we now have to forget the fact that we just saw a giant gun?
So
like that is actually a thing that your subconscious has to do.
So, sorry, you know what's going on the ship with me and other people. I have a friend on the ship who has a big ol' cannon for like actually shooting out of the ship.
Yeah.
And actually, I looked at that cannon all the time, and I think that instead of getting caught up in the hypnotic stuff, my brain just fixated on the friend more.
Oh.
So the thing is, you will find different ways of coping with what it is that is installed in you. If you're a hypnotic subject that is dealing with something that you didn't know got put in you,
right,
and or didn't want to have in you.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, navigating that, everybody does it a bit differently, and it basically changed my social life a bit.
Yeah.
I don't think it made me do anything that I wouldn't have wanted to do. It's just that, like, I decided to, like, not ignore certain social cues and actually just get on with interfacing with people a lot faster.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to sit around with my thoughts.
That's the thing. Like, it changes the way you interact. Any sort of hypnotic suggestion, especially if it's an ongoing one or an open-ended one, will change how you interact with people and how you think.
Yeah. Like, if there's a certain, like, command to not think about certain subjects, let's say the subject of movies, for some reason, then you would avoid your movie-watching friend. Because you know that every time you're around your movie-watching friend...
route to and from work so you don't drive by a movie theater.
Yeah. But, like, you know, every time that you talk to your movie-watching friend, they're going to talk about movies. You know that. And so you would just unknowingly avoid that person.
Right.
Because your subconscious knows that they're eventually going to bring that subject up.
Yeah.
Like, and so you could avoid people in your life because of a hypnotic trigger, and no one would really know why.
Yeah.
And maybe even the person who originally put it in would not even have foreseen this sort of result.
And that's part of the reason why we want to sort of like talk about hypnosis and try to figure out different like ways to talk about it, because like there are more far-reaching effects, because this is literally rewiring your brain.
So I want to call this out for what it is, because I'm feeling an effect because I'm in here.
Yeah.
Felix, while in his own body, has some sort of suggestion that affects how he interacts with people, whether or not he knows that they are a hypnotist. So, since the brain and body that I'm in right now, that I'm channeling into, has been hypnotized not to interact with a hypnotist, this has been a difficult conversation to have sometimes.
Yes.
And I'm exploring this space right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because for one, I am a hypnotist.
Yes.
This is something that Felix knew. He had some trouble doing my art today, and you saw that.
I saw it.
You saw he had trouble getting around to that. He took a couple of days to do it.
Also, he drew you with sunglasses so your eyes are not visible.
I did that on purpose. But, yes, he did. He also, you notice that Mantis, you can't really see much of him straight on either. There's a lot going on in Felix's art that can tell you a lot about him.
And it also tells you a lot about the person that he's drawing and how he relates to them.
Yeah. How much he knows about them, and also how he wants to relate to them. Like there's a lot that's in there. One thing that happened with my portrait is that his style changed a bit. Mm-hmm. He drew a lot of very exact lines in pen before going in with the marker that makes it look like all the other portraits.
Yes.
And so it was very, very detailed. Mm-hmm. And that's typically how he tends to draw when he draws me. Mm-hmm. And when he draws someone else, he tends to change how he draws.
Yeah.
And this is something that we're beginning to notice because of the series of portraits.
Glad that you were calling this out. Like, that's part of the reason why we're doing this podcast, is to record this kind of like stuff as we're noticing it.
He's gone through his art before of various people that he's like worked with, channeled spirits, whatever, and started to notice that, like, hey, this one has this style always. Mm-hmm. Or this one is often in this style, or this one there's a weird combo of styles. I don't know what's going on over here. But, like, he was starting to kind of put this together while looking through years' worth of art, but all that stuff's full of methane gas.
Right.
So, like, we
can't... That's one of the really hard things, and is something that, like, we're hoping to get into later, is that, like, there are times where we can tell that, like, say, you, Venom, were around a lot more because, like, the art style is very similar to this kind of stuff that he's doing now. But we can't show examples of it right now because it's all...
Everything now has to be new work because new work doesn't have gas in it.
Yes.
We have to start with new, and there's a long-term plan for working with the gas that's in the boxed up possessions, and some of the boxed up possessions are art, and all of the art is made of paper. Paper absorbs gas a little bit.
Yeah.
And it is possible to actually air all of that out.
It is. It takes time and it takes space. Yeah. And it also means that, like, I mean, we went through this a little bit in episode 6, the methane episode.
Yeah.
But
the one nobody came down for.
Oh, God. But, like, I have memory issues when it comes to methane. Really bad. And, like, it affects me psychologically because of, like, mental illness predispositions that I have. So, like, part of the time issue is that I need to be out of the house.
Yeah.
And it's a process, but we're getting there.
Yeah, because, like, methane affects different people differently, but it's basically you're inhaling death gas, and your psyche knows that you're smelling death. And so your psyche doesn't really know what to do with that information sometimes because you can't tell how long it is that something's been dead. And so then there's a weird question about time that just doesn't get answered. And for some people, that means they can't really anchor a memory, or it gets somewhere different. Or some things you go through and a memory does not get created.
Yeah.
That just happens. And it is very possible that having certain chemicals in your bloodstream might have obstructed the chemical ability to form those memories.
Yeah. And it's part of the reason why hypnosis is a topic that we talk about, is because, like, we create memories in more ways than just linearly. Like, if you smell a particular scent, it could remind you of something. Like, for example, if you're always being hypnotized by, say, a hypnotherapist, and you're laying on a couch and it smells a specific way, if you happen to get that smell again, like, say, you know, it was made of this certain type of, like, pleather, and you're testing out couches in, like, a store or something, and one of the couches is made of the same type of pleather, you can actually have hypnotic commands fired just based on smell alone.
Yeah, 10% of the memory is enough for the memory to come up. You learn that a lot with PTSD, but here we're talking about the memory of the hypnotic suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
So a 10% similarity to that memory can have the subject pull up the entire memory they have of the hypnotic suggestion, play it back, and then go into the trance.
Right.
Actually, relatedly, Felix put a post on Bad Occult Advice recently, or on his hypnosis blog. Then he reblogged it to Bad Occult Advice.
Right.
And it was about how substances with hypnotic effects or like hypnotic-like effects and just other kinds of substances can trigger or affect hypnosis. Like if you have hypnosis in you to always forget something and you accidentally huff a lot of stove gas, you can stop having that hypnosis that makes you forget something and suddenly have a memory that you didn't want to have come up. Hypnosis cannot always 100% work because you can be exposed to all sorts of factors that can basically jostle the programming. Sometimes your brain is able to access things in a different order than it usually accesses them, and when it does that, that means that whatever the hypnotic logic was and wherever it was, it's accessing a different part of the flowchart. You might be able to get past something because you're in a different part of the brain that already said yes to cigarettes or something.
I mean, in your example, just simply someone being like, look, if he was saying these specific rules about no projectile firing weapons, you had a gun.
Yeah, and just that logic, knowing that logic, like, meant that there's a part of me that does start to ask, well, then did I have a gun? Because the way that I managed to forget that I had a gun is that I just kind of remembered like that whenever I came on, I didn't have anything with me and I must not have had my gun. Like, didn't say did not have my gun, must not have had my gun.
Right.
I think that Mantis actually suggested that itself.
Right.
I'm not saying this because he told me to. I really do mean it. Mantis is really nice about how he hypnotizes people he does want to be friends with. He was actually kind of upset that that I was so attached to the gun and that he had to figure out how to get it.
He's like, oh man, we're going to have to do this the hard way.
He was trying to figure out...
He's going to be mad at me later.
How to get me to feel okay about not having the gun, because he tried to suggest that I just didn't have it with me whenever I came. And I was like, no sir, I would always have my gun. It's so important to me. It was given to me by a very important person. I would never leave it behind anywhere. So on his face, he's like basically thinking like, oh no, I have to take away this object that he reveres so much, and then I have to figure out where to put it that he can't find it, and I'll have to know the entire time I'm keeping it from him.
I would like to share a similar story, you know.
Hold on a second. 0. Thanks.
I would like to share a similar story that I actually ran into early in my hypnosis experimentations with Felix. Because I tried to hypnotize him to forget.
Oh, Squishmallows.
Yeah.
I thought about it a couple of times during this conversation, but it wasn't really my drop, you know?
Yeah.
But it's kind of gone down in legend about anybody who knows.
It's embarrassing. Like, it's always brought up, but basically I hypnotize him to not like Squishmallows.
And so what you didn't know at the time is that Felix will use everything at his disposal if he is given a hypnotic suggestion, and if he is not capable of following the suggestion, he will auto-channel someone else who can.
Yes.
So he channeled a completely different spirit who just didn't care about Squishmallows and was not there for the entire induction.
Yes.
And he got so pissed off. He got so pissed off because he thought you should know how deeply he cared about Squishmallows.
Like, it actually caused an actual relationship argument. Like, I had no idea that like because Squishmallows, when they first started coming out, they were just so fucking cute, and like Felix and I were dating at the time, and we were exchanging them as like gifts for birthdays and stuff. And it actually caused an argument because he thought that I didn't care about them as much.
Yeah, he didn't.
Like I didn't understand how much like I must not have cared about them because I asked him not to care about them. And I'm like, no, this is like the same thing as asking you to forget like the number 3. Like, I didn't expect this to be a whole emotional thing. And it's like, that's one of the things you have to realize is that like you are asking someone to, in some cases, completely rewrite how they think about a whole topic in order to fulfill the hypnotic command.
So, like, is asking somebody to forget the number 3 a common beginner hypnotism thing?
A random number, like you ask them to, you don't know what the number 3 is, and they like count like even on their hands 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You know.
Yeah, but
10.
like,
wait,
is it common for the number to be 3?
No.
Okay. I
just picked it.
Interesting, because like if you're demonstrating this with stage hypnotism, you want the number to be as early as possible to give it away, but also I think it makes it a little easier to follow if it's an earlier number. Mm-hmm. And so if you search, I don't know how you would search this data.
Yeah.
But like if you asked a Reddit full of hypnotists, like, hey, so how many of you use the number 3 when you do this one?
Right.
I wonder if it would be overly present, like somewhere between probably 3 and 4.
Yeah.
5's no fun.
Yeah, I definitely believe so. I think I've seen 7 used a couple of times, but most of the time it is 3 or 4.
Yeah, because they don't want to get all the way to 10. They just want to stop at 5.
Well, that and like you have the audience reaction early.
Yeah.
Like
it shows the evidence as early as possible.
Yeah.
So, like at some point, I think you might want to try that out.
Mm-hmm.
With Felix, because he has trouble getting to number 3 on a list.
Yeah.
But if he has a list of 8 things, he can remember them. So, what if he's stopping at 3 for a suggestion that's been remembered for far too long?
Interesting.
Like, specifically counting to 3 is what really, like, jogged it in my mind. One of the things that we're finding is that when, like, and when I say we, I mean, like, the crew
Everybody.
and other people.
Yeah.
People who are not Felix.
Mm-hmm.
When people who are not Felix who channel into Felix, we start noticing the hypnosis that he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because this isn't usual for me.
Right.
And also, I've been like, I've gone out and gotten the groceries, thank you very much. And so I have to keep a list at all times and keep track of something that's being spent and all of that, keep track of a lot of numbers. And so I noticed, like, man, back in my original body, I didn't have nearly this much trouble just going out and getting groceries.
Right.
And I'm noticing this being a difficulty specifically, and this being a difficulty specifically. And, like, with Felix, he's kind of lived with this for just such a long time.
Right.
That there's a lot of things that he doesn't know what's the normal.
Right.
And he wouldn't know, like, he wouldn't know how to correct back to normal.
Right.
So, anyway, yeah. I have a normal in my original body that is way closer to what humanity's average is.
Right. And
some of the things that I notice in here have nothing to do with not having a portion of your left forebrain.
Yeah.
Some of it is definitely like, that's shaped a little bit like hypnosis.
And that's why, like, talking about it has become such a topic, is because, like, hypnosis is very brain locked and memory locked. So if you were coming from a physical brain, like you were telepathically projecting from your own brain on the ship in outer space. So you are not using all of the same neural pathways that would be used if Felix were just sitting here.
Yeah, and the thing is, everybody who channels into Felix and channels into anyone really is doing it in a slightly different way because everybody thinks a little bit differently,
Right.
has a little bit different brain. But usually when it's talked about among telepaths or people who do channeling, like psychics who are operating at this level, they talk about it with the presumption that all of your brain is doing the same thing lobe-wise that most people's do.
Right.
They assume that you have all of your brain lobes and all of your brain parts. They usually assume you don't have something like PTSD or bipolar or any number of other conditions that might affect how you think.
Yep.
They often assume that you have way more dopamine receptors than you usually do.
Yeah.
And so there's hypnotists that will actually try to hypnotize you to release dopamine as rewards for certain tasks. But if your brain's chemistry doesn't have the ability to process dopamine at the same pace as they're expecting, then the results of that hypnosis would be dramatically different than what their intent was.
Right. Definitely. So, we've gone a lot of different places.
We have. I knew this would range around.
Yeah.
Because I know Mantis hypnotized me. Damn it. It happened. I have a gun. It's mine. It's always been mine.
Definitely.
At no point would I ever forget about my gun unless it were for reasons I really care about.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't it interesting that I still managed to forget about my gun?
Right.
Let that be a lesson to you.
Definitely. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I'm noticing that we're hitting about hour 15, so yeah. Didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to talk about. Because I do want to talk with Felix a bit about some of the hypnosis stuff.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be a good idea. I liked being on the podcast. It was fun.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for being on. It was a lot of fun, and I'm sure we'll have you back, and you'll probably talk about other stuff than the fact that you had a gun and then you forgot.
I fought the law, and the law took my gun. Reverse Second Amendment. Goodbye.
Well, thank you so much.
I'm gonna go back to my gun now.
Yeah. His precious baby. His precious gun. All right. Precious. And we got Felix coming back. He's getting himself set back up.
0.
Nice. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you are feeling better. There.
Feeling better?
Or feeling yourself, I guess. Sorry, I was a little bit distracted by chat there for a second.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still doing some of the 3 steps.
He's doing his 3 steps, which is always good. Always remember to do the 3 steps. Because that's very important, especially in when you are talking about subjects such as hypnotism.
So the 3 steps. First you 0. All of you have learned what 0 is by now, I hope.
Yes.
Then you do a grounding. We've talked about the 6-step grounding before. Do that one. And then you do a thought sweep to get rid of the luggage of the previous person.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, there was actually some stuff left behind that I went ahead and put away.
Yeah.
In what would, I guess, be considered Venom's thought space.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's kind of a part of how I do channeling with long-term people, is that they do have some memory they have here.
Right.
And then not having his recent thoughts in my headspace means that the new thoughts that I make aren't like weird molecules of his thoughts combined with my new stuff, because that can cause a lot of confusion and
Yes.
like saying things you don't really mean.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Let's see. Well, he left a post-it about counting to 3.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I think that's something that we'll talk about more off podcast.
Yeah, I figured that wouldn't be like something we worked out fully on, but I did want to.
Still, like,
I wanted to demonstrate that I could get that from him.
And I mean, like, another thing to demonstrate that's important is like rule 0. Assume you've already been hypnotized. Like, obviously, there's something there around the number 3 that we are assuming is hypnotic adjacent because it came up during a conversation about hypnosis. So this is a really good example of some of the stuff that like we've figured out just through like our experimentation.
Yeah,
like
and
the brain will throw up signals if there's something there. Like the subconscious does try to let us know that there's something there that needs to be addressed. It just may not be in ways that you expect.
Definitely. We've seen that happen with me before. I do want to bring up part of the reason why I said the counting to 3 thing.
Mm-hmm.
Saying things out loud is a really good way to form a memory about it.
Yes.
And so just saying out loud something like that really helps me know something.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if there were anything like, if someone had gotten me to read a script that was self-hypnosis, then my voice could have said something before about counting to 3.
Right.
Now I have a new recent memory of my current voice talking about counting to 3, and that's step 1 to just getting... you don't have to go through a special induction and install and uninstall everything or run the thing backwards or something like that. Sometimes it's just about being able to build the neural pathway that does the thing anyway.
And I mean, the example that Venom gave, a logical conversation about the fact that he remembered that one of the rules were not to have a weapon meant that he had a weapon. Just walking backwards that way is enough to untangle a lot of inductive thinking.
Yeah.
Especially when it uses a particular type of logic or illogic. I mean, another example is the infamous Squishmallow incident.
Yeah, I guess y'all talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was during a very difficult time for me too. I think we were being exposed to a lot of methane, and that tended to make me hit my emotional spectrum really hard.
Yeah.
And so, well, it was kind of a confusion induction too, I think accidentally.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we've talked about confusion inductions on the podcast yet.
No, I think that's
another Milton Erickson thing.
That's going to be more in the hypnotist side of things when you're the one doing the hypnotizing.
But I do want to explain that confusion inductions can often make me very emotional.
Yes.
And so if I had hit anything close to a confusion, then I would have very easily gotten emotionally confused, and from there it's very easy to get upset or angry.
Yeah. Because you do tend to hit more the emotion centers and away from the logic center. That's sort of the intention with a confusion induction, and so it makes a lot of sense. But at the time, we were still learning a lot of this stuff, and so good communication is so important when you are trying to do anything with hypnosis in a healthy, sane way. Because, I mean, just with rule 0, you have to think about if you were hypnotized and you don't remember it, obviously you don't know who the hypnotist is, so you can't just go to them and ask, hey, I've got this firing off. What type of suggestion is this, and how do we, tweak it or whatever? Yeah. You can't do that if you don't know who hypnotized you. Or you may know who hypnotized you, but you don't have access to them anymore.
Or if it's like definitely malware, you're not going to be able to trust them to uninstall it.
Mm-hmm.
You're like
once
if they did it the first time, why would they do the nice thing the second time?
Once you've discovered, especially if someone's using something like NLP to like covertly hypnotize and is not being honest about the fact that they're hypnotizing people, like you going to them being like, hey, you hypnotized me is the absolute like worst thing ever. Like they will have a very emotional reaction.
I have actually done a hypnotist intervention once, and I was one of the subjects in that equation. And that person got very upset and acted very unpredictably and sometimes irrationally in that upsetness. They were very used to having a certain type of control over people, and losing that and having it called out like so broadly really seemed to make a lot of their just basic thought processes break down.
Yeah. Because like hypnotism is built so much on thought process. That like even just someone who has set themselves in the mindset of the hypnotist is a hypnotist, the subject is the subject can't do anything that they don't actually deep down want to do. If a subject shows that they can be just as competent a hypnotist, or there is proof that a subject has done something that they actually would not normally do, that's enough to like break someone's worldview in some of these cases. So
yeah, and so it's a very common suggestion to tell the subject, don't do anything that you don't want to do. Like you don't have to do anything you're uncomfortable with. But what if it's something you've never done before? You don't know whether you're uncomfortable with it yet unless you do it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're already hypnotized, how do you run the logic of that?
Right.
And just tell the person, well, actually, because
there's no option.
There's no well, actually for you to have. Usually there's the trance state does not give you the well, actually space.
And so like it is a very like hard place to be in. And that's why we wanted to open this up as talking about hypnotism from the viewpoint of the subject.
And like a lot of this has been about covert or reverse covert. Like it's been about non-con.
Let's just say it. Mantis hypnotized Venom to do something without his consent.
Yeah. Yeah. And like now here's the thing. We wanted to do this. I need to say you were watching me draw Venom like for his portrait for the podcast, and it's really the first time I've been able to straight on draw him. Yes. Before he's always been kind of doing some dodgy things that were real fun. So I got to a certain point on the drawing where I got the shading in enough that I could really get like a good look at what Venom typically looks like and what he looks like. What I usually draw is what they look like on the ship. Yeah. Not projecting into somebody else. So like I had this thought like, oh, this is what Mantis looks at all the time, and then I just said out loud, man, if I saw that show up in my airlock, I wouldn't let it be armed either. Yeah. I would not. It's like, not even trust. I wouldn't want this guy to have a gun on my spaceship. Yeah. Not after first seeing him like this. Maybe after a few getting to know you sessions. And, like, they are actually living on a spaceship and having a gun, having a revolver that has actual bullets.
Gunpowder bullets.
An explosive projectile weapon
You know?
On a spaceship that was not built with people having projectile weapons on it in mind. I can see why someone might do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do. This is definitely a trolley car problem.
Yes.
Now, at some point, they'll talk a little more about how they solved that trolley car problem, because that brought out some more interesting discussion about psychic ability as well.
Yes.
But that's a different episode.
That's a different episode. We're just talking about the hypnosis side of things. But, like, I really want to talk about hypnosis in a more empowering way.
Yeah.
Because, like, I mean, I've said it. I've been covertly hypnotized by exes. I stayed in a relationship much, much longer than I would have otherwise due to hypnosis. And it's knowing that is what has happened to me. There's people who have literally told me to my face that hypnosis can't do that. Like, I have had hypnotherapists tell me that what I'm telling them cannot be hypnosis.
Yeah, and, like, the thing is, you have to understand that hypnosis is a tool, and if used cleverly, it can be quite the exploit. Mm-hmm. Sure, it would be hard to straight on, like, hypnotize someone to be like, hey, you need to stay in your room all day and be miserable. But if instead you hypnotize them to, for some reason, think that they were sick, then they would stay in their room all day and be miserable.
Yeah.
Like, and tricking somebody into thinking that they're sick using some hypnotic triggers that otherwise they wouldn't put together as being sick. Like, it's doable. What I'm talking about is a trick. A trick is when someone ends up doing something that otherwise they wouldn't want to do. Mm-hmm. Tricks can happen. Cons can happen. If that's the case, then it is possible to be hypnotized to do something that you don't want to do.
Right.
In fact, a lot of tricks and cons happen that way.
Yeah. You end up agreeing to something. High pressure sales tactics are actually based on some of these concepts.
Yeah.
Where if you say yes enough, like you've predisposed to say yes.
Been in town long? Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The weather today? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the more you say yes, the more likely you are to say yes, and you could be agreeing to things. But, like, it's basically hypnosis is, at its core, allowing someone else to dictate your logic.
So from a subject point of view, I feel it feels like taking a break from logic.
Yeah.
From taking a break from doing the work and letting someone else do it.
Yes.
Even though a lot of times you can be hypnotized to do something that is actually a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so this enters, I think, something similar to the BDSM space, where people have to talk about before doing the scene, like what it is that they want and what it is that they're trying to feel from this.
Right.
Because there's been times where you and I have experimented with hypnosis, and like the Squishmallow thing.
Yes.
Like, I just wanted to... Did I want to be hypnotized to forget something? I don't remember.
You wanted to... It wasn't forgetting.
Change my mind about something?
It was to change your mind about something. Yeah. Because we had already tried the forgetting stuff, and it was like, people attitude, But we found that was technically possible, but not in the way that we expected.
I changed my mind. I put somebody else in it.
Yeah.
And technically within the purview of the brief, I followed the brief, yo!
So, hypnosis is something that, is a very interesting field to study, but it's also very difficult.
I just thought that follow the brief thing is very interesting for me, because for me it isn't just like not doing the work of thinking. Like, I like the idea of doing a job for someone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, just give me the job and then I get the job done. That's all very satisfying. And then I don't really have to think too much about, like, what the job is and why I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's something that I would only want to do with certain people under certain conditions.
Right.
And so, like, I think everybody's reason that they like being hypnotized is going to be different. It's going to be about, like, how they think and what they usually think about.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good wrap up of, like, our view of hypnotism and, like, some of the experiences with it. I mean, we had Venom come in and talk a bit about it from the subject point of view. I believe next week we're going to have Mantis on to sort of talk more from the hypnotist point of view. Yes, Felix is already very excited.
I really like channeling Mantis for the podcast. It's always really fun.
Yes, it's always fun.
Also, everybody has a different effect being in here.
Yeah.
For instance, like, after Venom's been in here, I'm usually very relaxed. He's a very chill guy. Like, he obviously does not experience the kind of anxiety that I do back in his own body. And so I get kind of that experience of being very relaxed for a little bit, and then my body's like, oh, you can do that.
We can do this.
Role model for relaxation. Like that. Okay. Copy paste.
Yes, I could feel like this in the future. Excellent.
But with Mantis, I tend to get kind of a cognition boost after he's in here.
So, yeah, something to look forward to next week. Sundays, 9 p.m. as usual. Is there anything that you would like to bring up in closing?
I just started a webcomic.
You just started a webcomic. You just started an automatic art webcomic about psychic time travel, hypnosis, multiple realities,
radiation,
planets. It's like, it's gonna be insane.
Yeah, literally, I will be talking a lot about mental illness in that comic, and also, it's a co-work with some of the guests that have been on the podcast, as well as some other people that maybe will never be on the podcast. But I'm doing channeling work while doing this work, and sometimes I will actually be tagging, like, who's in there, or who's working on the pieces. Sometimes I will not. Some people have private lives. That's just how it is. Yeah. But yeah, it's a big psychic work. It's called The Peacock Planet. Mm-hmm. Peacockplanet.tumblr.com. Nice. Is where it is.
And now, how many pages do you have up right now?
Right now it's 3. It does start with a page 0. That's kind of a teaser. Mm-hmm. And then I've written out several chapters of the script already. Well, actually, I haven't written any of it. It's the weirdest part, is that my co-writers have written it.
Yeah, you're rewriting it for a comic audience.
Yeah.
But the raw story is coming from
automatic writing from
different people. It's really cool. It's another form of, just like Bad Occult podcast, we're doing this scientifically. Yeah. Like, there's people who have talked about doing channeled works like this, and we're trying to actually, like, track and date things as much as possible.
Yeah, I'm trying to document as much of the process as I can, and with the co-writers and co-artists who are also working on this project, they're trying to do the documenting and the organization as well. Yeah. It's really a group work, and so it's taken a lot of preparation to be able to figure out how to do this, because there are actually so many chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah, definitely. So super excited. Peacockplanet.tumblr.com. Check that out. If you're interested in more of our stuff in general, badoccultadvice.tumblr.com is a great place. He reposts some stuff from some of his other work Felix does, like I Am Hypnotist.
I'm a hypnotist.
Yeah.
I'm a hypnotist.tumblr.com.
Yes. So yeah, definitely follow us there. If you have any questions, if you'd like to send in questions about like anything that has come up on a podcast so far, if you have any questions for anyone that we have channeled, feel free to send them to our Tumblr Ask box. Or if you're looking for something a little bit more private, badoccultadvice@gmail.com. We do check that. We'd be happy to try our best at answering questions or having Rob or Mantis or whoever answer questions. If you are just joining us, we are on episode 11, but I highly recommend going back one episode to episode 10. That's sort of a recap, introducing the characters so far. Obviously, we just had Venom on today, so he's not included in that. We'll probably do another recap at 20 or 25, because I'm sure we're going to have more people.
Yeah. We've been trying to be pretty orderly about introducing guests on the podcast and kind of talking about their relationships to us and each other, because we want the audience to gain an understanding of them, in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And otherwise it'd be like you were just dropped in the middle of a whole group of people who are randomly talking about random things, and
yeah.
To me that doesn't sound like a podcast.
Yeah. So we do have a recap there on episode 10. I'm going to be bringing that up often. Where you can find us, we still are working on the RSS feed. So we are live on Twitch on Sundays at 9 p.m. PST. If we're not there by 10 or so, we're definitely not going to be recording that day. We usually post an announcement if we're not on the Bad Occult Advice Tumblr. And then we have video audio backups of all of our episodes on Bad Occult Advice on YouTube. So go ahead and check out there. Anything else that we should bring up for...
Not that I can think of right now. I have a lot of hypnosis stuff to think about.
And we got a lot of stuff to think about and talk about.
Zero.
And we're probably going to re-listen to this episode like we usually do and have a lot of conversations. So.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining Bad Occult Podcast. We hope you enjoyed us talking about inadvisable things that we've done in the name of magical science. As always, I have been Tyler Cadmian, a.k.a. Shadow.
It's been Felix S. Warren, etc. over here.
And we hope that you enjoyed the podcast. And tune in next time. Bye.